Hey guys! Alright, so today you're going to take some notes for symbiotic relationships, Eco 3, but first I need you to write down the 3 questions that are on the screen right now. That is your bell work. So you can go ahead and pause the video, write down the questions, answer them, and then we will go over the answers. Alright, so number 1, which of the following is an autotroph, a producer, a consumer, or a decomposer? Well, first of all, we need to think about autotrophs. That means they make their own food. A producer also makes his own food. Consumers have to eat other things. Decomposers break down dead things. So your correct answer would be producer. Autotrophs and producers are different words for plants. Number 2, what cellular process do consumers go through? So as I just mentioned, consumers have to eat things to get food. In order to break down that food into a usable form of energy, which we call ATP. That process is called cellular respiration. Number 3, what is the source of energy for most living things? You should definitely know this one is the sun. We have to have the sun. Every living thing needs it. All right, so make sure you got those written down in your bell work. You have the correct answers. Open up your notes to page 5. We're going to do Eco 3 notes on symbiotic relationships, also called symbiosis. All right. So, first off, an ecological niche or niche, either way is fine, I call it a niche, is the role of an organism in its environment. This includes the food it eats, how it obtains its food, and how it interacts with other organisms. So, the food that it eats, I mean, there's tons of organisms in every ecosystem. Whether it's eating meat like a carnivore, whether it's eating just plants like herbivores, or whether it's eating both omnivores, how it obtains its food. So it could be an autotroph, makes its own food, could be a heterotroph, needs to consume other things to get energy, or it could be a decomposer. And then also how they interact with other organisms, which is kind of the focus of today. There's lots of different types of interactions between organisms in an ecosystem. Some of them benefit both organisms, some of them harm one of the organisms, and we'll get talking about that in just a minute. All right, so competition, we know what competition is, but occurs when there are 2 or more organisms that need the same resource at the same time. That same resource could be water, it could be food, shelter, it could be space, it could even be a mate. So whether the species are the same, like the 2 lions that are fighting, it looks like they're probably fighting over a mate, or different species, like the 2 squirrels, we've got a red squirrel and a gray squirrel, both of them have the same niche. They both want to live in the same place, they both want to eat the same food, and so they are going to compete for that food and for that space and shelter. Two species with identical ecological niches cannot coexist in the same habitat. If they have the exact same food source, the exact same shelter, need the exact same amount of space, are fighting for the exact same mate, there's going to be problems. So those species usually somebody's going to die or somebody's going to move, one or the other. Competition can lead to a decrease in a species population. If we are fighting over the same amount of food, or we're competing over the same food, somebody's going to get the food and somebody's going to starve. If we're competing over the same mate, somebody's going to get the girl, somebody's not. So the person or the organism that does get its mate is going to continue its genetic line, it's going to have babies, and they're going to be fine. The other person or other organism either needs to move on or it's going to die. It's not going to have a mate and it won't have babies, and that'll be the end of that. So, lots of different organisms all live in an ecosystem. They all interact in different ways, but we're just saying that if it has the exact same niche, needing the same food source, same mate, same place, there's going to be a problem. We call that competition. Predation. We're familiar with predation as well. That's your predator-prey relationships. There's lots of examples of that on the screen right now. A predator is something that does the hunting and is eating usually smaller organisms, and then the prey is something that's getting hunted or getting eaten. So for example, the owl and the mouse. The owl would be the predator, the mouse is the prey, unfortunately. The top picture on the right is a ladybug eating a bug that's called an aphid. We usually don't think of a ladybug as being a predator. However, they actually do eat these aphids. That's kind of a good thing for us because aphids actually are parasites for plants. And so the ladybug eats the parasite off the plant, which helps the plant, and then the ladybug also gets food. Of course, we have a bear and a fish. The bear would be the predator, the fish is the prey. And then lastly, I think my face is covering it up a little bit, but there's like a leopard or a cheetah after a gazelle. The leopard or cheetah, because it runs faster, it's bigger, it's a meat eater, it is the predator, and the gazelle is the prey. All right, so here is a predator-prey relationship graph with the snowshoe hare and a lynx. A lynx is kind of like a bobcat type animal, wild cat. Snowshoe hare is like a big bunny. So take a look at the graph. What is in red is the snowshoe hare, and what is in blue is the lynx. Kind of see how those relationships go up and down. There are actually the same exact graph as in your notes on page 5, and there are 3 questions that you need to answer based on this graph. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it just to make sure we're understanding what this graph is saying, and then I'm going to leave it up to you to answer those 3 questions. So, as you can see, in red is the snowshoe hare population over time, and then in blue is the lynx population over time. It seems to be that the snowshoe hare and the lynx population are pretty much going up and down at the same time or pretty close to the same time. That makes sense in a predator-prey relationship. The snowshoe hare is obviously the prey, so when the rabbit population goes up, there's lots and lots of food for the lynx, so the lynx population is also going to go up because there's a bigger food source. That area has a larger carrying capacity now. It can support more lynx. However, when we get lots more lynx, all right, lots more lynx require lots more snowshoe hares to eat, and therefore the snowshoe hare population is going to go down. When the snowshoe hare population goes down, that means there's now lots and lots of lynx and only a few bunny rabbits. And so the lynx population is also going to go down. Either some of them are going to starve or they're going to move out in search of different food sources. And it seems to be repetitive like that, and it kind of always is in a predator-prey relationship. If there's lots of prey and that goes up, the predator population will also go up. When the prey population goes down, the predator population is also going to go down. So, knowing that, there are those 3 questions on page 5. You can pause the video, go ahead, check out the graph, think about what I just said, and answer those questions. All right. So, topic of the day, as I said, symbiotic relationships. Sometimes we call that symbiosis. Means the same thing. A symbiotic relationship exists between organisms of 2 different species that live together in direct contact. So, we have many different types of ecosystems. We talked about that last week. What is pictured right now on your screen is like a bird brushing and flossing the teeth of an alligator or a crocodile. That's a real thing. That really happens. It's an example of a symbiotic relationship. The bird is actually called a plover, and it usually happens with a crocodile. So these 2 animals coexist. It's kind of a win-win situation. The crocodile, most people would think, would just like eat the bird or something, but that's not actually how it works. These birds actually go in and eat up all the gross stuff, leftovers, I guess, bacteria, whatever, that are in the crocodile's mouth. So the bird is getting a benefit from this relationship. It's getting food, and it also kind of gets some protection. Crocodiles will literally sit with their mouth open, and the bird just sits in there, and it won't eat it. Pretty cool. The crocodile is also getting benefit because it's got excellent dental hygiene now. All right, he's getting a tooth cleaning. We call it a mutual symbiotic relationship. It's a win-win. Both organisms are benefiting. So here's another picture. It's Nemo. Nemo is a clownfish. We know that he lives in a plant type thing called an anemone. Think about what kind of relationship you think those 2 organisms have in the ecosystem. Do you think that the fish is benefiting in any way from this relationship? Do you think that the anemone is benefiting in any way from this relationship? It's actually another win-win. We know that the clownfish uses the anemone to hide from predators and stuff. So it's obvious that the clownfish is getting a benefit in this relationship. It gets shelter because the anemone stings a lot of other organisms and they won't go near it. However, this is a win-win. The anemone is actually getting something too. In real life, Nemo, the clownfish, is actually a very territorial fish, and there are other fish that like to eat sea anemones. So the clownfish, if it's living in the anemone, actually protects the anemone from these fish that are trying to eat the anemone. Again, win-win. It's called mutualism. Mutualism is when both organisms benefit. They help each other survive. And there's a few different pictures of that example on here. What I'd like you to do is in your notes, next to where you have mutualism, put a plus plus, all right? Two organisms both benefiting. So it's a positive thing for both organisms. Sometimes we represent this with like two smiley faces, if you like smiley faces. The first picture there with the zebra. All right, we have a zebra with a bird, it's actually called an oxpecker, on its back. This is a mutual relationship, symbiotic relationship. The zebra has fleas and ticks and stuff on it, and the bird sits and hangs out on the zebra eating those fleas and ticks. So the zebra is benefiting because it's getting cleaned up. It doesn't have all these organisms living on it and trying to suck its blood. And the bird, the oxpecker, is benefiting because it gets food. The honeybee and the flower. All right, the honeybee is pollinating the flower. That's helping the flower. The flower is spreading and being able to make new flower babies. And the bee is actually there to get the nectar, which it turns into its honey later on. So again, a win-win or a positive for both organisms. The picture in the middle there that looks kind of like a spider is actually a spider crab. The reason it looks like that is because it has algae growing all over it. So the two organisms there are the spider crab and the algae. The spider crab is getting a benefit because the algae helps protect it, or not protect it, well, kind of protect it. It is camouflaging it with the sand, all right? It looks kind of furry and it's the same color as the sand because the algae is growing all over it. The algae gets a benefit because it has a place to live. And then the last picture is something you probably wouldn't think of either, also another mutualism type of symbiotic relationship. It's a termite. Termites eat wood. And wood is kind of hard to digest. So the termites actually have microbes, bacteria, that live in their digestive system, just like you and I. And the microbes or the bacteria help digest the wood particles. So the termite's getting a benefit. It's getting help digesting its food. And then the bacteria are living off of that food. It's the same thing with humans and the good bacteria that are in your gut. It's a mutualism symbiotic relationship. Our second type of symbiotic relationship is called commensalism. Commensalism is a relationship between two species where one species benefits and the other does not benefit, but it's also not harmed. So next to commensalism in your notes, put like a plus and a zero, or one happy face smiley and one smiley with like a line, you know, just chilling, doesn't really care. Something like that to symbolize that one organism is benefiting, it's a positive, but the other organism is not getting a benefit, but it's also not being harmed. Lice is an example of that. A lot of people think that lice is gross. It kind of is, but it's not really hurting the person that's living on. It's just getting shelter and eating up all the gunk that's in your hair. And then the organism, whether it's a bird or a human or whatever, is unharmed. It's not getting a benefit, but it's also not being harmed. The plants up in the top right, that is called an epiphyte, or like an air plant. They live on trees and stuff. It is a positive for the epiphyte because it actually gets its nutrition from the air, but it needs access to the sun. And so it lives on the tree where it can help it get access for the sun and a place to live. But the tree is not harmed, but it's also not benefiting. It's not getting anything out of the relationship. And then lastly is the shark, and it has like this fish thing underneath it. It's called a remora. The remora is benefiting in this relationship because it is actually eating all the scraps left over from the shark's meal. So whenever the shark eats stuff, when stuff flows by it, it collects all the scraps and eats. So it gets a meal, that's a good thing. And the shark doesn't really care. It's not hurting it, it's not sucking its blood or anything like that. But it's also not benefiting from the relationship. They're just kind of buddies. Another example of this would be like a tree frog living in a tree. The tree frog needs protection and a place to live. The tree is not benefiting, but it's also not harmed. And then lastly is parasitism. We know about parasitism. One organism, the parasite, is benefiting, and the other one is getting harmed. The host gets harmed. The really cool caterpillar there with the white things on it, that is a parasitic wasp laying its eggs on that caterpillar. The wasp eggs actually are start inside of the caterpillar, and when they hatch, they eat the insides of the caterpillar. The wasp benefits. The caterpillar actually dies. That sucks. So anyway, leeches, fleas, ticks, we've talked about tapeworms. All of those are examples of parasitism.